So there has been something on my mind recently when it came to legacy, or just factors in general of adding value to a fighter. Sadly, we can't match up our favorite fighters every single month or rematch them straight away because of, obvious reasons. So the community gave birth to MMA math. A variety of factors that we can see that can dictate how a fight may go. One very important MMA math factor is their resume, which still holds volume to this day, but one thing I noticed was that undefeated status holds little or no meaning now in 2025, and probably even worse coming into 2026. So why is that, when undefeated meant something? Khabib. First, we gotta go back to the previous era. Khabib dominated as a fighter and is still held as a GOAT to this day. Not as a fighter, but as an amazing trainer for the current roster. With his extreme training style and dominating sambo, it's a base that can basically guarantee you the top 10 in your division. That is obviously what we are praising him for right now, but looking back as a fighter, we gave a lot of praise for his undefeated status. Yes, he had dominant wins and a very good resume against the toughest lightweights, but there were times where Khabib did not look like the overall god tier fighter, especially in his striking. But that is fine because his wrestling and submission game made up for it. And the fans basically used his undefeated status to cancel out his mid-striking skills. Such as, why bother working on high-level technical striking if it will never reach to that point in the fight? You can just work on wrestling and sambo and maybe just your overhand faking a double leg takedown. Done and dusted. Cancelled out all the haters who wanted to critique his striking capabilities. Not to mention, he left undefeated as well. Not to say Khabib was lucky, I would say he would stay undefeated if he stayed, 2 years longer as champion, but when do we draw the line? 3 more years? 3.5? 4? There will be a time where a challenger has read Khabib to its absolute minute detail where he will lose. Because as your fame grows as a fighter, so does your bounty for the challengers. The more they want to expose you and take your throne, almost to a personal level, because they know you are the champion. You are the one that needs to be taken down. Your fighting style is the one that needs to be defeated. I think it was a good time as well. I think he did enough for his legacy. Although Khabib got the happy ending, other fighters didn't. So what happens when you stay undefeated and at the top for too long? Anderson Silva. Although not undefeated officially on his record, he was undefeated in the UFC and was breaking records with every fight. And with his flashy fighting style, there was almost nothing stopping him. It was almost like the only person that can beat him was himself. And if you remember what happened to Silva, that statement isn't entirely false. Anderson Silva, who was reigning for a number of years now, decided to showboat against his opponent Chris Weidman. Chris was not known for his striking, so for Anderson Silva, this was easier than his light sparring sessions back at the gym. And to be fair, if I was Silva, I would have let my invincibility get the best of me as well. Undefeated and untouchable for many years, what could go wrong? Well, that could go wrong. In contrast, one thing about the ground game is that it is extremely calculated. There is no way a challenger with no confidence in his grappling is going to somehow fluke submit a showboating Khabib. It just won't happen. But with striking it can, which is one of the reasons why fans find it so exciting. But let's get back to Silva. After that KO, he never really returned back. If anything, everything he tried to do after just ruined his legacy. He broke his leg in the rematch, just kept on losing to stronger challengers that are just so much more younger than him, and he kept dripping down the rankings. So as much as I admire the spirit of Anderson Silva by still fighting till that day, I also see the stocks of undefeated status being lowered as well in this MMA math economy. Because of that. Ronda Rousey. You can think of this as another Anderson Silva moment. Ronda was undefeated for the longest time and was kind of the mascot of women's combat sports, and kind of the UFC as well. She had a super proficient fighting style of judoka, which made her basically the strongest in the division. But then again, she let the undefeated status and fame get to her head. She was a reigning champion. She had books, big video interviews, everything she wanted. Except good striking. Her striking was very flawed, and when she was put up against a strong kickboxer, we saw what happened. Another titan losing their undefeated status and never really jumped back to who they truly were. She later lost to Amanda Nunes and then retired. Jon Jones. Kind of. This is going to be a little bit controversial for people because Jon Jones isn't really undefeated. Jon Jones is a bit of a weird one. He tainted his legacy so that he can keep his undefeated fight record. I feel like he knew what was going to happen if he suffered a true loss and what it would do to his legacy and his fighter mentality. But in exchange for that, he put a giant asterisk to his potential GOAT name. When he was a young reigning champion, he was too famous and too skillful for his own good, for his age. A young champion in that industry has the freedom to do anything. So he basically did do anything. He drank and crashed out on God knows what just before his fights, because he can. He basically nerfed himself and still won, which would give anyone the biggest identity crisis. Like, who are you? Is there actually anyone on earth that can beat me? So as the title reign continues, he became more scared of losing. He is just so far up, he can't even imagine how painful the downfall will be. So he did everything he can to continue winning. Testing positive for illegal substances, did every trick in the book to win during the fight, such as eye pokes, and basically ducked any potential fighter that had a good chance on beating him. So as the years go by watching Jon Jones' legacy, we see that the undefeated status of him didn't really account for much. We do see the vision on him losing, we saw the robberies, the flaws, the ducks. There are just so many wins with extreme contexts that fans now just don't care that he is undefeated. Just that he's a very skillful fighter now. Israel Adesanya and Alexander Volkanovski, and maybe Kamaru Usman. Now we reach the modern UFC era, where we start to really see that being undefeated may not be as special as we thought. But as you may know, it also reflected on the live betting odds for fights. Yes, Izzy and Alex being undefeated spoke volumes on how great they were as fighters. But we knew that they were not going to leave the UFC undefeated. Not in this time and era. Even if they were the best fighters in the world in their primes, the UFC will still try to keep them on and milk them until they aren't in their prime and they will be defeated. It's come to that point in the UFC's product life cycle where they need to milk something like that. So Izzy lost his undefeated streak against Jan and Volk lost against Islam. One thing you noticed was that these fighters weren't fighting in their respective divisions. They wanted to go beyond and capture something greater. And it came at a cost of their undefeated status. So it reminded the UFC fans, oh okay, switching divisions holds a lot more weight. It's such a big thing where it can ruin someone's undefeated status. It ruined the great Israel Adesanya's undefeated status. It ruined the great Alexander Volkanovski's UFC undefeated status. So now, the undefeated status doesn't hold that much of a meaning, seeing how these amazing fighters couldn't keep it moving up a division. So after that, fans and fighters came to another realization. Being double champ holds more weight in your legacy than just being undefeated. We know it's harder, and there are so many more fighters in the roster that are undefeated that aren't good, and there are so many fighters who have win streaks that aren't good too. So in came the surge of fighters talking shit about how they want to be double champ just for the sake of speculation for the fans and obviously to build hype.
Give me a jet to Spain, baby. I'm coming for Ilia Topuria. And if he doesn't want it, I want Ilia, baby. Give me Ilia.
That would be perfect. I feel like me going out there being double champ. Wow. First ever from the UK anyway.
And no undefeated prospect is now saying, oh, I want to be undefeated throughout my whole career. No one's saying that anymore. It was no longer the pursuit to be undefeated in their career. But it gets worse. We found out there are other things for a fighter they can pursue now that holds more value, such as double champ. The undefeated status itself lowers in value as well. So you would think this would be the end of the video. But it gets worse. So we just found out there are other things for a fighter they can pursue now that holds more value, such as double champ. But also, the undefeated status itself lowered in value as well. There are a huge number of factors, but here are some that I think are the biggest. The skill inflation and fan expectation inflation. As more fighters join the roster, the competition is going to be higher. It's already so hard to become champion now compared to years ago. But to be undefeated is even worse. There are more fighters that have more knowledge and experience dealing with MMA scenarios now. There are less fighters with bases in the modern age. Yes, they will have their personality shine through where they prefer a certain style, such as Ilia Topuria loving striking more now instead of his base of wrestling. But we have reached an era where just having your base as MMA now is the move. So that means there are more completed fighters in the roster. There will be no more room for flaws if you are undefeated. If you are amazing in wrestling but have super bad striking, it is now just a matter of time before you'll be dominated. Because there will be a fighter that could even you out in the ground game and beat you in striking. So fans will not see your undefeated status as high value if they can see your fights and see that you're sloppy in some aspects. So even if you are undefeated and might go your whole career undefeated and become champion, the fans are just adjusted to what they have experienced before and just truly won't care during that climb to be champion. Another reason is there are many ways to join the UFC now. Because the UFC is basically a MMA promotion monopoly now, all MMA fighters basically have the goal of joining the UFC and having their goal to become the UFC champion. There is no MMA fighter who becomes the UFC champion and then in his post-fight interview, he will say, okay, I am going to compete in PFL now and pursue the PFL belt. It just doesn't happen. So with that being said, there are just so many ways to join the UFC. But because the UFC is accepting, champions of regions around the world, for example, a third world country champion in their region is almost eligible now to, debut in the UFC. It's a good qualification now. We are finding fighters like Azat Maksum and Anshul Jubilee fizzle out in the UFC debut or their second fight. So being undefeated just doesn't hold as much weight after seeing these examples. There is also the Dana White Contender Series, which is getting more popular. So of course, the team behind the Dana White Contender Series wants to scout for more fighters. So there will be more undefeated fighters who will have exciting finishes or something and get the contract, only to break in the middle of their UFC career because they aren't fighting cans anymore. So that accounts for another reason why being undefeated doesn't mean much. We are now just looking for UFC records now. It makes good marketing when Bruce Buffer says your name and then it says, 12 wins, no losses. But the less casual fans will probably research the fighter a bit more and see what their UFC record is. And when they find out it's only like 1-0 or 2-0 or something, then it doesn't really mean much. And the inflation has gotten even more crazy, where it's how many ranked UFC wins do you have now? What's your ranked UFC record? So that is something we actually might see in the future, which is crazy. Road to UFC. The UFC wants to close off one championship and other dominant promotions that has captured a certain region in the world. So they created Road to UFC. Basically the same model as the Dana White Contender Series. So the story is basically the same, but it ruins the undefeated status even more. Because you can dig even further to those undefeated fighters that got their contract from the Road to UFC, and you can start to see that their wins were from actual nobodies. Not even cans, just straight up nobodies. So they lose their O even faster than the fighters from the Dana White Contender Series. And to make it worse, the UFC doesn't even like foreigners. Okay, racism aside, but it's kind of there. Generally, there are exceptions, but the UFC doesn't really like you from the start if you're a foreign fighter with no stage value. So you have a flimsy, undefeated record, and you're going to lose it in your first few fights in the UFC, and UFC fans don't even get the chance to watch you because you're going to be placed in a prelim fight night card. So there was no opportunity to begin with. Who's going to watch a UFC fight night prelim on a dude who is undefeated but didn't really fight anyone of note? No one.